It's an amazing looking festival, and it's so focused on pilots. This is like the new Sundance for television. It has that feel.
It's a really great idea to do a festival for serialized material. I think it's cool. It's kind of ahead of its time.
They seem to be really tapping into a broad spectrum of both new and emerging talent and also more established talent.
We're really excited because we didn't realize that we were part of this wave of independent television. Our next favorite TV shows are going to be independently produced.
It's so exciting to be at SeriesFest with this project because television is where all the big risks are being taken, where the most exciting work is happening. And this is a festival that celebrates that.
I'm gonna start, and we sort of teased this prior to walking out here, with that ending, because I feel like it's a specific way to end a pilot. I'm gonna take my mask off so you can see me. And it's also really sort of representative, I think, of the show's title and what that means. So can you talk to me about the decision to end the pilot that way?
Well, sort of leave them wanting less. I've not invented the genre of the medical drama, it's fair to say. And it was, I think, important to all of us making the show that it did something a bit different. And I think it's not the sort of show where it's all about, you know, this is the patient of the week and will they get the diagnosis right and what's going to happen. It's more about the impact of the job on the human being. How do you be a decent doctor and a decent, you know, friend, partner? And I think in this episode, and then continuing through the series, he definitely fails at both of those. And it's an exploration of which develops definitely during the series. It's not so much of it here, of the sort of the mental well-being of doctors, which isn't something that's hugely discussed, but and it's done through. I mean, it's billed as a comedy drama. It's definitely got there's humour in there, but the humour is a sort of coping mechanism, defence mechanism is the idea. I mean, that's what humour was for me when I was. I mean, that is you know it's a relatively loose adaptation of my book, but my book was literally the diary entries I wrote at the time I was working, and I wrote the funny stuff as a way of dealing with the rubbish stuff.
So I want to ask about the funny stuff, because I think it's interesting how you intersperse it with the seriousness, and you sort of you just talked about why, but I'm curious about how you sort of figured out what the line is in terms of, like, this is a really tense moment, this is an emotionally overwhelming moment. Do I drop sort of bitter sarcasm, jadedness, humor here, or when do I lay off?
I wanted the show to be a fair and honest representation of the gig as a doctor. What's the point of me writing it as someone who used to work in that field, you know, if it's not going to be a fair representation? And the gear shifts in medicine I found absolutely extraordinary between the funny and the sad. So, like, being antenatal clinic, prenatal clinic, sorry, you've got different, I have to translate everything, don't I, all the words are different. So in prenatal clinic, you know, something will happen, and then I'll be already practicing how I'm going to tell this funny story at dinner parties and at the pub afterwards. Mm-hmm. And then the next patient you see, you're telling them you can't find their baby's heartbeat, and it's the most devastating moment, probably in that family's life, and that's just what the job's like, and you don't have a chance to take a beat and recharge because your bleep's gone off and you're onto the next thing, and it might be serious, or it might be funny, or it might be, something in between.
So I want to ask, you mentioned sort of the diary entries, and there's a lot about moving this from your life to your memoir to the screen that I was really sort of interested in. I'm going to ask you the thing that's sort of been on my mind the most first, which is, how did you figure out what about that experience? Because it is directly related to you, and the viewer knows that. What did you want about that experience to be on screen? And was there a line about what you weren't willing to portray?
It's about the mental illness side of things mental well-being was very important, and the first scene I wrote was from the end of episode 6 and backtracked all the way to the, to this episode. And I think I'm quite a lot nicer than the character on screen. I had the option of making the character with my name some sort of amazing superhero who sweeps in and charmingly saves everyone's lives. But that would have been rubbish television. So, it was enough of an ego thing having Ben Whishaw play me. I made it. It's a deliberately complicated person acting very, very badly throughout. Which sets up other stuff that's obviously going to play out throughout the series. I don't think I drew a line anywhere. In fact, this was a co-production with the BBC and AMC Plus, and BBC came on board first. The book had done quite well in the UK, and more than one broadcaster wanted to make it, which was extraordinary for me because normally less than one broadcaster wants to make things I've come up with. And the BBC said, if you make it with us, we're not going to tell you can't do that. This is too much, and that was what I wanted to hear. And AMC were equally supportive on that it had to be the sort of truthful, honest experience of what the gig was like.
You just mentioned too much, and when I think about too much, I think sort of about how much of this world and what this job entails that we see. We are sort of getting an inside look at birthing and that process that I don't think we've ever really seen in this way on screen. And so I've got a ton of questions about that, and I'm going to start first with, how did you decide how much of that, we talked about this before, the cord coming out, from that on, how much of that did you decide you wanted people to see, and why?
I've got absolutely no barometer about what's disgusting, how much is too much blood. I've got no idea. Everything's just totally fine. It's just what happens. But luckily, lots of the other people involved were able to sort of say how much they're having to watch it through their hands. We shot everything, so the prosthetics were incredible. And all of the medical advisors we had on. Every single time there's a midwife doing a procedure, we've got an actual midwife there. Anytime there's a doctor doing a procedure, we've got a doctor there who does their day-to-day is that exact operation. And we shot everything, and it's hyper-realistic. And then we would get notes back saying, that's quite a lot of blood there. Do we need to see that much? Or we could probably get just a glimpse of the baby being delivered rather than every horrendous second of it. So, because I wanted it to be not shocking, but not sanitized. But at the same time, I didn't want people turning off after minute 2 because it was barbaric.
I think we're increasingly sort of having conversations about like things like intimacy coordinators and comfort levels on set. And because you are dealing with not anything that's sexualized, but it's really intimate and very sort of real. Beyond all of those people that you had for the medical stuff and the prosthetics, how were you sort of navigating birthing scenes with legs wide open and things hanging out and
with intimacy coordinators?
Okay, there we go. I'm interested in how that would be different. Can you sort of talk about what they did for your production?
I'd love to be able to, but we shot it during COVID, and as a mere writer, I was sat at home watching it on an iPad. So, but they were crucial to it, and Lucy Forbes, who's the brilliant director, was adamant from the start that's a crucial piece of the jigsaw, and rightly so.
So I want to pivot a little bit, and I want to talk about Ben and the narration and what a key role he plays in sort of how we navigate this world. Because this was based off of your diary entries, coming in, I sort of took that narration as you trying to replicate what was in your book for the screen. But how much conversation did you have around how to do that? And did you ever consider anything outside of the fourth wall breaking?
You're exactly right. It was really important to have a device that glued the TV show to the book, because the book's quite different. It's hundreds and hundreds of little vignettes, no sort of arc really, and that's what we had to build out in the TV show. But the voice, I think the thing that was very important was the honesty of the character speaking to us, because if you're a doctor doing a cesarean section, you're not going to necessarily say out loud everything you're thinking. The patient's awake, all your colleagues are around, and so I needed him to speak to us, and which he does, semi-honestly. I started with a voiceover in the first draft, and that was abysmal, and then decided it needed to be a piece to camera, and that went through 2 or 3 different iterations of trying to do it, and I think almost coming up to shooting, the idea was that the world slowed down as the character talked to camera. And then Ben, who is just brilliant, he was very sure, and Lucy was too, that the answer was actually to do it subtly. And so it's asides more than anything else. And we play with that device a bit as the series goes along.
I'm not gonna ask a question about that because people haven't seen it beyond this point. But I do want to ask about Ben and sort of the role that he played in helping shape this character with you. How involved was he sort of in that process? I know you are the writer, but were you having conversations about how to portray this character, or was it sort of very separate?
I had conversations with lots of the actors, and the character of Harry, for example, I'd never quite got right on paper. I couldn't quite work it out. And then when we cast Rory, I could suddenly see the character, and I rewrote it all, and there was a lot of interaction on that. And Ambika, who I think is extraordinary, playing Shruti, who's done basically nothing before, and now she's like acting opposite Ben Whishaw like that. I love her. We had huge amounts of discussions about that character, because how do I know how to write about the experiences of an Asian junior doctor in their early 20s, and she was, she added a huge amount, and she's loads of research and came to me with so much stuff, which was wonderful. Ben and I hung out a bit, and I thought we were just having fun, but turns out he was sort of observing me. Like when we first did a read through, my husband, who's one of the execs on the show, said, "It's amazing. He's got all your weird mannerisms." I don't have weird mannerisms. What are you talking about? But he's a very. I just think he's a brilliant actor, and he would only be in touch if he couldn't understand the truth of a line. He would flag it, and it would always be because I'd gone for a gag or something, and it isn't actually something that the character would have said. But he's as I was saying before, he's good and nice, and normally in actors you have to choose one or the other.
So my next question is sort of about how you tackled with your cast creating that very specific dynamic of workplace interaction. There's a pacing and there's a treatment amongst these characters that feels very specific and has, like I said, a very specific pacing. What were you trying to sort of reveal about workplace dynamics in this kind of ward at the hospital, and the kinds of people that work in that space?
So, I mean, that episode's an HR disaster, isn't it? No one's acquitted themselves particularly well in it, and that was, I thought, a fair representation of the strange, almost militaristic, hierarchical system in hospital. And you can see, Lockhart treats Adam like that, who treats Shruti like that, and as it goes along we see the pressures that he's got from like the hospital administration, and as Shruti gets better and more senior we can see herself checking herself as she's doing similar behaviour to people junior to her, and I wanted to get that across in a hopefully interesting but realistic way. And at the same time, you've got, Adam thinks he's all that, and we start off with him being all sort of confident and superheroish, and then we realise that he's just drowning, and the only bit of competence in the labour ward is Tracy, who keeps him in check, and that was my experience learning from brilliant midwives. It's a slightly different, I think, dynamic in UK and US labour wards, but I just wrote what I knew. It was funny, I asked AMC at the start, is this too like British? Do I need to make things more like sort of global and accessible? And they said, absolutely not, just make it real, and which we did. And when the book came out, it's I thought I was writing this very particular, specific, esoteric British diary, and then it got published in 37, 38 languages, and I would get emails all the time from doctors in Belarus and Chad and Venezuela or wherever saying this could be set on my labour ward, because there's clearly a universality about the experience, whatever your zip code, whatever colour passport you've got, whatever anything else, it's still doctors and patients and giving birth and babies, and those are the same everywhere. The same shit goes wrong.
It's universal, yes. I also wanted to sort of ask about the direction on the series, there is a way that this show is shot that emulates the feeling of being in this place and what people are sort of dealing with on a regular basis. How much of that was scripted? You saying, I want this cut, it goes here, and how much of that was a conversation with your directors or their style?
I'm a firm believer in knowing your limits, and I am terrible at thinking visually. So I sort of described a vague vibe. I mean, but Lucy Forbes is a brilliant visualist, and her attention to detail is really extraordinary. And when we first met, she had this huge, book of reference pictures, and she talked a bit about shooting it almost like a war film, and she brought some of that into that. I think the amazing magic trick she's done with the designers and with Benedict Spence, who's the DOP. It looks, I think, cinematic and beautiful, but at the same time, it's quite clearly a hospital, and a real-looking hospital, which are not generally beautiful places, and she's managed to make it quite, it's realistic and watchable. I say it's realistic. We built this set in an old university building in East London. Initially, we planned to shoot it in a real hospital, and then COVID meant that all the real hospitals didn't have any spare wards. And any time I walked onto the set, or the medical advisors walked onto the set, or the midwives walked onto the the people who were being the experts on set, everyone instantly sort of tensed up, because it was they made it so realistic. It was stressful to be back.
So my final question for you might be hard to answer, but I'm still going to ask it. You based this off of your book. There's a certain number of episodes in season 1. Have you considered how you carry this on after this first season, and where you go? I
learned the only people ask me as a writer, what are the rules of what's your advice and stuff, and there's only one thing that I was ever taught that I think's worth passing on. I learned it when I was 4, and it's that a story's got a beginning and a middle and an end, and I wrote this with a beginning and a middle and an end. And I'm not one of these writers who's clever enough to do that and think where it could go. I've told the story that I want to tell, and I don't know. I mean, I loved the experience. I loved working with Ben. I've been blown away with the reaction it got back home, and but at the same time, if I was making a second series, it wouldn't be for the right reasons. It wouldn't, because I don't have the creative drive. I don't have the story I want to tell. I've done that. So never say never, but probably never.
Fair. Before we go, I just want you to tell folks here about the name thing that you told me about before we came out here.
Oh, yeah.
I want them to know this story.
So the book, taken from my actual life, clearly involved my actual colleagues, actual friends, actual family, and I handed the book to the publishers, and they handed the manuscript to the lawyers, who were very keen that the publishers didn't go to prison because of it. And the legal report came back, and it was, I think, probably slightly longer than the actual book. And one of the main things is, obviously, you need to change all these identifying details, and these people can't have their names. And so I was like, all right. So I went through it, and I handed it back and said, how's this? And they're like, you've changed all of the names to Harry Potter characters. And if anything, that might be legally even worse. And that went backwards and forwards, and then the book got published with the Harry Potter names in it. And most people got renamed as we adapted it for the telly, apart from Mr. Lockhart, who there's a Professor Lockhart in Harry Potter who we stole his name from.
It's a great story. Adam, I want to thank you so much for doing this series and coming here to Denver and chatting with us about it. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, all of you, for coming. It was great to have you here.